Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be talking about my Legends experience. And by Legends experience, I mean Legends is the name of a card store over in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I participated in their store regional. So that was held on Saturday, May 17th, and it was just a lot of fun, not only just meeting some high caliber levels of players, but meeting both new and old players, and it was actually a capped event at 32 players, and, well, we had all 32 players show up. So it was a pretty decently sized event, and it was just a lot of fun to participate in in-person events. So hopefully Bandai decides to want to do more and kind of spread them out, but that's neither here nor there. As far as how I did overall, I did end up playing Imperialdramon, and I got 5th place. A little bit more disappointed in my overall performance, but it is what it is. Sometimes always expecting to get 1st place is a little bit unrealistic, and I was just trying to get the invite in one shot. Before I actually get into the nitty-gritty of the event itself and my matchups, I will preface this by saying that it was only 4 rounds. The 5th round was cut out because I was playing on table 1 and table 2 in the finals. They ended up tying, so that ended up cutting the entire tournament 1 round short, and because I lost in finals, that bumped me all the way down into 5th place. A little unfortunate there, but I'll get into the games and matchups and kind of how and why the event played out. But as far as what I ended up taking to the event, I'm a dirty, filthy blue player, so I have to play a blue deck, and Imperial is one of the more appealing blue decks in my perspective. I'm not going to go too in-depth in terms of the deck profile and the overall card choices, because for the most part, most Imperial decks are probably the same at this point for the blue-green side of things. But in terms of what I actually find appealing with blue as a whole is just the sheer amount of mechanics that it's working with, and Imperial as a deck, it seems like it has the ability to kind of just do a little bit of everything, which is really fun. If you want to be hyper-controlling, you could play more towards that and build towards that. If you want to be a little bit more aggressive, then you could also build and tech your deck to be that as well. I took a more kind of mid-range stance on it, where I am leveraging a lot of the aggression in the early stages to then lead into good control or floodgates, so that way, even though I'm not going to be OTKing the opponent, I'm still dealing decent damage to where whatever I'm going to be going into is still going to be highly threatening and lock the opponent out of the game, ideally. The interesting new development, and I guess it's not really a new development with Imperialdramon, is the fact that we actually, without Mirage, are going to want to leverage as much card draw as we possibly can. Sure, it does suck that the Stingmon that lets us draw whenever we're attacking, period, not limited to once per turn, is limited to 1, but we have basically a Vmon that's going to be doing that, and now, because again, we don't have the threat of Mirage, we're going to be swapping over to Draw Eggs, whereas before we kind of were running a mix between DP and Draw because of literally just that one matchup. So the deck had definitely got a lot more consistent, which is awkward to say because we did get one of our key consistency pieces hit, but the deck really still just functions as a whole. As far as just kind of like the quick summary, the rookies is just the rookies. The BT12 stuff are some of the best searchers in the entire deck. The fact that we have 2 of them just again adds to the overall consistency. And then the highly coveted end of turn ability to DNA just allows us to extend plays that we reasonably wouldn't have otherwise. And that's kind of also why I'm running the Wormmon just as an extra copy essentially of the BT12. And the Vmon is in here for the card draw. It has basically just the same levels of tempo as the BT16 version, and because we don't need DP, because we need the card draw more, we want to run this card more as a result, and then the BT16 Wormmon is just the extra extender for when we need to actually utilize cards in our trash, which does happen a good amount of the time. Then when it goes to the level 4s, again, not really anything special here. We're just running the XVs for jamming, the stings because they're stings, and then the only new tech that we added is the Imperialdramon because we already were playing in armor before, and this is just one of the better armors that's in color. Then the level 5s, again, no real change, just multi-attack shenanigans, good removal, and partition is absolutely broken of an ability. Then when it comes to the level 6s, this is where things kind of vary a little bit from my builds versus others. I'm not going to say this is completely unique, but I just decided to play half into the Imperial line and half into generic good blue stuff. So Tamer Hate is really important, and Hexablaumon is our real best Tamer Hate, while also being a floodgate that synergizes with DNA because he could have lots of sources from said DNA. Invisimon is a really fantastic generic card because D-Digivolve was kind of the only ability that we were lacking in terms of dealing with problems that we couldn't otherwise, so this card definitely does come in handy. It also has some cute cheeky plays with the Imperialdramons because he won't have jamming, but the Imperialdramons, if he has an XVmon in him, will have jamming, so we can make the swing with Invisimon, then D-Digivolve himself, have him hide in security, go into a Imperialdramon, and then the check happens as Imperialdramon with jamming. So it's kind of neat there, and then obviously from that point forward, we're probably going to just digivolve into another level 6 to try to floodgate the opponent out even further, which is why I'm running the BT16 dragon mode, because this is basically a pseudo floodgate because it really de-incentivizes the opponent from playing Digimon out by card effects or digivolving by card effects, so it always puts them in threat of any of our fighter modes to kind of just ruin their entire game plan. And we did get a new BT20 fighter mode, which is a really good card because he is an additional floodgate on top of basically a floodgate. So being able to double floodgate the opponent is very appealing. Even though the color synergy isn't exactly there, we still have ways to be able to dig him out and use him pretty consistently. But, you know, aces are still good because the ace can go on the level 5 or the level 6, so even just having a level 5 multi-attacking is still pretty threatening because we're still always potentially threatening an ace play from them. And that's kind of also why I'm running Paladin mode Ace, is because it's just another generically good floodgate. It definitely hoses on purple decks that want to utilize the trash, so I want to disrupt that as much as possible to put them at as much of a disadvantageous situation as possible. So that's kind of why I still feel like he's really good, because there's not a whole lot of grave interaction, and he's one of the few cards that actually has grave interaction. Then, because I'm playing him and the fighter modes, it just makes me want to run Progenitor. Progenitor also can help revive the Tamers out of security. Progenitor also can clean up some of our plays where if we don't have, like, the other level 4 to be able to DNA, then we could still Progenitor go into a level 5, even though technically we're supposed to Progenitor go into a level 6. It's just a highly flexible card that also adds some extra sustainability into the deck. And then the only real, like, crazy tech is just Jade Memory Boost for added consistency. Not really much of a spicy card there because we're not punished for running it. Sure, this could be other options if I really felt like it, but I just wanted to be as consistent as possible because sometimes the deck still has a tendency to brick, and when it bricks, you just feel really bad. Trying to brick it as few times as possible is partially why I think this is one of the better cards for this deck in terms of the option slots. But yeah, it's not really a unique or interesting deck, it's just what I decided to play based on what I personally like and where I felt like the meta currently is. And I do think that based on where the meta is, this is actually a deck that's positioned relatively strongly. It's just probably people are tired of playing this after a year with minimal upgrades, and I totally get it. I took a break from the deck, and now I'm probably going to be back on the deck if I'm going to be playing competitively based on the current direction and trajectory of where the meta game is. Oh, and I also do have the full meta breakdown in terms of all of the represented decks, and I technically do have the decks because I have access to that spreadsheet, but for the most part, just assume that there's not really going to be that much spicy tech that's going to differentiate what the deck is going to do at its core or base value. So you could see in terms of their placement, what deck got what place. And as you could see, I am the 5th place Imperialdramon. If you really want to like look at the top 8 in terms of the players' names, I did make a YouTube post about that. So feel free to reference that if you actually want to know like who were these top 8 players. But overall, it was a pretty decent spread in terms of the decks that were being represented. And I think that, like, yes, there is a good amount of decks that are being played. I still think that there's a consolidation towards, like, what the best decks actually are. And you can see based on the top 7 that this is kind of just a growing trend in terms of the different types of decks that are being represented and the roles that they're fulfilling and what decks are actually the best at those roles. Because at the end of the day, meta does stand for most effective tactic available, so these just were some of the better decks in those given roles based on what was actually represented in this event. So going over some of the games, round 1 was probably the most interesting match because it was a deck I really wasn't expecting to see, which was 3 Musketeers. So 3 Musketeers with the Appmon support definitely got some new life and new legs. I think the deck is pretty interesting on what it's capable of doing. I still feel like there's a lot left to explore in that deck in order to get it to be a little bit more powerful, but for right now, we're still in the testing phase as far as what that deck's able to do, and unfortunately for the opponent, Imperial was kind of just able to dance around all of what it was able to do. It did have some annoying plays, but again, this is why Partition is like really important, because a lot of their abilities delete the opponent's Digimon, and well, when my Digimon get deleted by effects, Partition splits them out, and most of the time, because their options are pretty costly, they're not able to keep their turn after like digivolving or utilizing an option to try to remove my Digimon to just not remove them. And then because of my offensive pushes being so high, again, on the flip side, if I hit a security option and I have an extra DNA set up because I had Partition, then I kind of still just do all the same things all over again, and it allows me to actually put my aggression even farther ahead. So it puts like 3 Musketeers in this really awkward position where it just felt like it was a really bad matchup, and that was probably the most interesting deck that I saw all day because it was a deck I really wasn't expecting, and it was a deck that I feel like has tons of potential for exploration in terms of making it actually good and efficient. Then going into some of my other matchups, round 2, I played against a Hunters deck, and Hunters is another pretty interesting deck in terms of the updates that it got to allow it to be a little bit more competitive. I feel like the consistency definitely got a lot higher thanks to the new Tagaru just being essentially 2 tamers in 1. So that was really good and interesting to see how that was going to be playing out. There was a tiny bit of like misplays going on in terms of rule sharkiness, but I felt like it just is what it is. It was my mistake to make, and they were just calling me out on it. And yeah, I just took it with a grain of salt and continued to push forward. So this was a match that we actually had a pretty good back and forth just because Hunters can be hyper aggressive at times while also being pretty controlling at the same time because of the new Imperialdramon having the ability when you digivolve up into him to attack without suspending. So that gets you basically a free attack out of nowhere for doing nothing, on top of the fact that the new Arrestor has a really powerful ability to be able to make himself larger for every card in its inheritable sources, and then the inheritable sources are already going to be doing stuff. Most of the new stuff does have some DP gaining, so he's a level 5 that could hit way above his weight class, which is really interesting to see in effect because it sometimes, like what I did, catches you off guard on how big he actually is. So, fun fact, just make sure to ask questions in terms of how big the opponent's Digimon is, and make sure to actually read the cards so you know how big their card is going to be. So, misplays aside, there was that back and forth, and I just managed to squeak out that win. Not necessarily for any discernible reason. I think I just put my opponent off their game when I got into my high level Digimon, kept their tamers off with Hexablaumon, and then they really just weren't able to recover in the games that I won. So it was just pretty simple. That's why Tamer Hate is going to be really good and really important, because a lot of decks are super heavily reliant on their Tamers in order to be effective. So that's why certain decks are doing as well as they are, is because any deck that is running Tamer Hate, essentially that whole portion of what that card is capable of doing is basically null and void and doesn't necessarily matter. So I'm not saying Tamers are bad because of all of the Tamer Hate that we got and that's being played. I'm just saying it is definitely a factor into how successful a deck can be when it comes to their usage of Tamers and if they even want or need any at all. Granted, I shouldn't be talking because my deck loves Tamers. Having two Kenzen Davises on the field basically means I get free level 5 setup, and I could even net positive on memory, especially if I have a Davis on the field. So, like, again, I'm not really one to talk, but at least, like, it kind of goes to show, like, when your entire game plan is revolving around a Tamer versus the Tamer just enhancing the game plan that you already are capable of doing. Because there's plenty of games where I've played where Imperialdramon just kind of has as a misstep, and it's unable to actually find or utilize its Tamers properly or efficiently or at all, and and that's partially why I feel like Imperial is still pretty good, because the Tamers just enhance the gameplay. It's not the core sole driving factor of the gameplay. Plus, Progenitor also is a way to help recur them if they were ever to get removed or deleted. Well, mostly deleted. If they're bottom decked, I got no answer for that other than hope I see another one. But regardless, it was a very intense match, probably one of my most intense matches. Yeah, it was just a lot of very interesting and tight back and forth based on how fast the decks move, which kind of made it an interesting matchup overall. But then going into round 3, this is when I played the Galaxy engine. It's just essentially doing the exact same thing as what my deck was doing, just utilizing a different engine, where their whole game plan was just to build up into a Mega level Digimon as fast as they can, and then floodgate me out of the game, and then their Mega level Digimon actually starts dealing damage. And where that differs from Imperialdramon, because we're playing very similar top ends, because they were using Hexablaus, they were using Invisimons, they were using... Well, they weren't using the Imperial stuff, but they were using some other level 6s in place of my Imperialdramons. But the whole idea was just to get up and then lock the opponent out and then start beating them in the face once they're locked out, which Imperial also tends to do. It just also tends to be a little bit more aggressive, which is something I personally like and why I favor Imperialdramon over the Sun and Moon deck or Galaxy engine. So it wasn't like it was a very hard matchup, because a lot of their Digimon, again, also Digivolve by effects. They kind of rely on their Tamer. They had some stuff going for them, and then I was just able to, get out there first or get out and recover and kind of just put a kibosh to their whole game plan, because they're way less aggressive than I am. And I think, that's the big deciding factor, is how aggressive a deck can be, because I think, just going up into a high-level floodgate and just locking the opponent out is fine and dandy. It buys yourself, 1, maybe 2 turns, depending on the floodgates, but you also need to pair that with some extra levels of aggression to actually be able to close out games. And I feel like that's where the Sun and Moon or Galaxy Loop deck is kind of falling short, is it doesn't necessarily have that great of ways to actually deal a hyper fast and consistent amount of damage to be able to close out games, which does give something like Imperialdramon a little bit more of an edge, especially if I'm able to leverage Partition to be able to keep my stuff alive and they're unable to do stuff about my stuff. Granted, I don't think Partition really mattered a whole lot in this matchup, but it is definitely a factor, because if they're using something like Gallon X, delete my Digimon, well, Partition, split out the bodies, I'm good to go. But regardless, it was still a very interesting set of games, just because it was funny that we were using very similar top ends to try to disrupt the opponent in some very similar ways, just utilizing different low ends. And then going into my last round, this was Angels, and Angels is still a pretty good deck. It's very annoying because of the high amount of protection it has, the board spamminess of it, as well as some of like the removal and control tech and aspects of it. It's just a very efficient deck at doing what it's doing. Probably the best mono yellow deck that we currently have in the game. And I feel like the big major reason, this is not like to scoff at the opponent's skill level. The opponent's skill level was obviously very high, got them to the finals and was able to clean out the game, but there were a couple of key pivotal moments and turns where I either had a small misplay that kind of spiraled things out of control, or I just straight up bricked, and I was unable to actually enact on my game plan to begin with. And being slower than Angels is definitely not a good thing, especially now that they have more tech and tools to be able to do whatever they want. I definitely was not expecting adventure cards to be shown inside of 3 Great Angels, and I definitely also wasn't expecting Volderarm to be something that 3 Great Angels is playing, but I mean, it makes sense because you do have the protection, and you kind of just need some extra damage, and Volderarm definitely is one of the best, not only sources of extra damage, but it's an additional floodgate to tell the opponent, no, you're just not going to be playing the game here. So it's a very strong deck, but again, I feel like with all of the different techs and tools that I was working with, I definitely had opportunities to be able to play a little bit better. There was a moment where I probably could have Invisimoned a little bit better because I forgot he Digivolves 2 instead of Digivolve 1, so I could have Source Stripped more efficiently to be able to just get rid of bodies even easier. And then on top of that, there was also a play where I probably was way more aggressive than I reasonably needed to be, and that kind of costed me my whole stack because it was a very suboptimal stack, and I should have just gone into a Hexablow and tried to lock them out of the game from that point instead of just trying to be cute and cheeky, going for the damage. But I also know against 3 Great Angels, you also do want to try to leverage how much you're being aggressive against them, because if they're at a really low security count and they don't have the Angelwomon Ace on the field to be able to recover them, then their protections are only so finite and limited. So I just made a very poor calculated risk, and it ended up harming me more than helping me, obviously. So between the combination of some minor misplays and absolute bricking on a couple of key and pivotal turns, game 2, it was literally a turn 1 brick, which is never what you want to see, but there was potential for me to climb my way back in because of how slow 3 Great Angels is. And I think like that's one of the big core weaknesses of 3 Great Angels is like if they aren't able to get up into their Dominimon and set up a field with a couple of level 5s to ace bait the opponent, then they're really just not doing a whole lot. And that gives you, the player playing against 3 Great Angels, the opportunity to be able to out-tempo them and aggress. And the fact that they have to commit to their field a little bit harder does mean that their cards are going to be a little bit more susceptible to certain removal types to further disrupt them. So I'm not saying like 3 Great Angels is a bad deck. It obviously won the event, but I'm saying I could have leveraged what I had to be able to try to play past the bricks and try to still at least take a game. And the bricks definitely didn't help because one of the big pivotal turns in turn 1 was they broke my partition, and then I was unable to DNA because I didn't have an access level 5 in my hand. So not being able to re-DNA to get up into a level 6 instantly for free kind of sucked, and definitely did not do me any favors. And then, like I said, a big misplay, even after trying to fix out of a brick in game 2, definitely hurt. So it's not like I played hyper poorly throughout the day. There were a couple of mistakes. Gameplay could have been a little bit tighter and cleaned up, but overall, it was still a really fun and smooth event to begin with. The TO offered some pretty decent prizing. There was some raffles. Everyone was just having fun, playing lots of Digimon. So that's going to be it for my event coverage. I really hope you enjoyed this type of video. Like I said, I'm probably not going to be playing in a lot of competitive events this year. One, work is ramping up and making it very hard to not only do content, but play competitively to begin with. So that's kind of why there was a little bit of a dry spell in terms of content, and probably going to continue to see a dry spell in terms of content, is just because it's a lot harder, so I'm doing my best to do what I can. So please be patient and bear with me. So yeah, that's kind of all I really have for this video. And if you enjoyed this type of content, you already know what to do. make sure to smash that like button and also subscribe. And if you want to stay up to date on when I go live or upload next, make sure to ring that notification bell as well. And with that, I hope to see you all in the next video. Later.